Good morning from Washington, D.C. I'm Lauren Reese, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this session on civil society's role in mitigating climate change. On behalf of my colleagues in the Wilson Center's Africa program, I want to say how pleased the Wilson Center is to be co-hosting with the Department of State and USAID this 10th anniversary virtual summit for the Young African Leaders Initiative. The Wilson Center is the living memorial to President Wilson. We were mandated by Congress to connect policy, practice, and research through nonpartisan, independent analysis and open dialogue. The program I direct, the Environmental Change and Security Program, connects issues at the intersection of environment, health, and security to foreign policy and development. Climate change is, of course, an important issue, not just for my program's work, but for the Wilson Center's regional programs as well, not least the Africa program. Climate change is changing the very context in which we live. It's affecting where and how we grow food, the availability of employment, the habitability of coastal communities, small island states, and drought-stricken lands. It's creating the conditions for extreme weather events and is contributing to lost livelihoods and driving increased displacement. These impacts are being experienced disproportionately in the communities that have contributed the least to carbon emissions. Nowhere is this more starkly illustrated than on the continent of Africa. At the same time, in our response to climate change, there is an opportunity to foster innovation, to form new partnerships, and strategically engage decision makers in new ways. There's an opportunity to shape a more equitable future and drive economic growth that is connected to the growth of clean energy. Climate change demands a whole of government, whole of society response. And in that response, there is a need for civil society to be a leading force on this global issue. Today's session is going to explore the role of civil society in climate mitigation. We have with us an incredible woman who exemplifies in her work the innovation and leadership of civil society and climate action. We're also hoping that Helena Techley will be able to join, but it seems like she's having some technical issues. So hopefully we'll see her soon. But we're going to hear first from Ms. Sarah Moola, an environment and energy specialist who is focused on developing renewable energy solutions for rural communities. Sarah is the founder of Now for Them Trust in Botswana and manages the consulting firm Saying Investments. She has served as the board member of the Botswana U.S. Alumni Association and as a future energy leader with the World Energy Council. If Helena is able to join us, I'll give her introduction when she arrives. So we've asked Sarah to speak to the role of civil society organizations in mitigating climate change's effects in Africa, the climate issues she sees as the most pressing in Botswana, and where she sees opportunity for youth and YALI in particular to get involved in mitigating climate change. I am in the unenviable position of following Sarah with a few remarks from a U.S. perspective on the role of civil society and youth in mitigating climate change. And then from there, we'll have a moderated discussion with questions from the audience. So I encourage you to send your questions in through the chat. Sarah, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. A great platform indeed. And such platforms that really exposes NGO work, especially in climate change, a very, very relevant topic which nobody can ignore. Thank you, Lauren, once again. My name is Sarah Moola. I am based in Gaborone, Botswana. I run an NGO called Now for Them Trust, as Lauren already shared. I started this trust in 2016, and it was mainly because Botswana has an abundance of solar energy, and I found no NGOs existed in that space. At the same time, we are a country that burns a lot of coal for electricity. And as said, abundance. If you've been to Botswana, the heat is unbearable. So as an environmental scientist doing my work mostly in rural areas, it came very clear that there was a lot of need for renewable energy or rural electrification. And I wanted to play a small role in contributing to that. But my target was scholars. You see, in Africa, like many countries, in Botswana, like many African countries, we end up with, a lot of us forgetting the rural areas when it comes to developments. They tend to lag behind. And the ones that suffer the most is the scholars. So I thought, how do I increase scholars' school grades to compete with urban, right? So how do I then do that in my space? being environment and energy. And I thought, why not start with solar lamps? So I started just a 100-kilometer walk in the Makgadikgadi Pants. If you know the Makgadikgadi Pants, it's one of the hottest salt pans in the world. And I would walk 100 kilometers in the pans for 2 days. And this was to raise funds for potential funders to really recognize, because, funders want their brands to be recognized. And when you come in as an NGO, what are you really offering them? And when you're talking about climate change and you're trying to say, I'm trying to educate rural scholars to understand climate change so that tomorrow they can be the leaders who can help us fight it, it's very difficult to convince somebody who wants their brand to be on a billboard. So when you say you'll walk 100 kilometers, it's very exciting. It's, oh, you'll punish yourself for this, but you'll be wearing our brand. So that's how it started. Over time, I got challenged a little bit by more of the corporate companies to say, you said you studied energy and you said you were exposed to the Mandela Washington Fellowship, and you put together a proposal of how you're going to grow renewable energy in Botswana. How are you going to do this post just donating lights? Can you build your own light? And this is how now we got to 2019. We won some money to then build our own lights. And the way we wanted to do it was in a way in which it really showcases the issues of climate change in rural areas. So we didn't assemble the lights in the city. We could easily have done that, but we decided to assemble them in rural Botswana with women and youth and throw in training to demonstrate what harnessing the sun means in terms of less coal use for electricity production. And it's when they really got to appreciate the fact that they were able to build these lights, that they got to really appreciate that there's even a bigger role that they could play. So, in collecting and cutting down trees for firewood, in them leaving just a light on just because, I moved from one room to another, but why should I switch it off? So they really got to appreciate energy efficiency and conservation in general, that if I cut down a tree, I must plant 2 or 4 or 5 or 10. And we continue to donate these solar lamps throughout Botswana. And in doing so, we're hoping that it comes with the education of that child really getting to appreciate what that technology that goes on that table that gives them light to be able to do their homework at night, where it comes from, because it's something very new when you talk renewable energy in Botswana, especially in a country that's very invested in coal. If you know, in the within the SADC region, we're strategically located in the middle of the SADC countries, which means we have one of the largest coal deposits. So economically, to the leadership, it makes sense to grow coal because it's safe in terms of it's safe in the fact that they've known and used it for many years. But our role as the NGO was to showcase to the leadership that as much as you're growing coal, please appreciate the fact that renewable energy also has a very high role in conservation and climate change as a measure of combating climate change and long-term solutions, because as we know, our coal will run out, it'll burn out, and it'll have major damage to our environment. But with renewable energy, I wanted us to really demonstrate the power of it, and that's how Now for Them came to be.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, it takes me a little longer to find the mute button and unmute button on this platform. That's really incredible, and I think there's a few key points that come out of your experience that are sort of relevant across regions, right? And thinking more globally. So let's see, real quick, I think I'll run through a couple of so I was asked to talk about lessons learned and best practices on the role of civil society and youth in mitigating climate change. I'm going to make a few broad points and then come back to you with a couple questions, and then tying in any questions that come in from the audience as well. The first thing I'd say is that over the last decade, and perhaps the last 4 years in particular in the US, there has been an important and growing recognition of the fact that responding to climate change requires a whole of government, whole of society approach. This is not something that country leaders are going to be able to do through established international multilateral processes alone. So now we're seeing what we've been calling at the Wilson Center new modes of multilateralism. So new partnerships and processes led by non-government and local leaders, innovators like Sarah. And through these new forms of engagement, there's an opportunity for civil society and youth to play this stronger role in high-level decision-making. There are a whole host of reasons as to why this is important, but I'll mention just 3 here. I think, first, effective climate action requires ambitious, sustained action, and the leadership of non-state actors is key to efforts that have staying power. Nowhere has this been made more apparent than in the United States. Under the Trump administration, the US backed out of the Paris Agreement, and that was a big blow to climate action. But in its wake, civil society, universities, and local communities partnered with US states to increase their own ambitions to ensure continued climate action in the US. Second, I'd say that civil society plays an important role in improving access to climate information and acting as a bridge between research institutions and the population. This is critical for informing climate responses that are effective. Third, civil society can help us understand the specific impacts of climate change at the local level and drive local solutions. One of the challenges of climate change is the unpredictability of its specific impacts. We know that the frequency and severity of storms and droughts are increasing, but what that means for specific locations and communities on the ground is harder to know. And what the knock-on effects of these impacts, how those impacts interact with existing vulnerabilities like social unrest, poverty, a pandemic, an economic crisis, is much harder to know. So it's the specificity of the impacts that's so hard to get right and to plan for. One of the best ways to understand the specific ways that climate change will impact a community is, of course, to engage with that community, with the civil society organizations, community and religious leaders, and the youth in those communities. No one knows better what the potential risks are and has a clearer sense of what is needed on the ground than the people living in those communities. I think, Sarah, it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about how you see the role of youth. It sounds like you've definitely been engaging them through your own work. I think one of the things that we've been thinking about in our own program, where we do focus on youth as an important component of all of these discussions, is something that a panelist, Unami Jeremiah, shared in a discussion we hosted at the Wilson Center a couple of years ago. She said that we need to have systems which allow positions of leadership to be passed on rather than held by the same people for generations. So it's not just enough to have a token youth at the table. We need certainly established leaders need to be creating and enabling those pathways for emerging leaders to become established. There also needs to be a two-way engagement where you have emerging and established leaders really listening to one another. While youth have an important vision and perspective on the future, established leaders know the pathways that have been trod and can help young leaders avoid some of the mistakes that have been made and hopefully build on the lessons that have been learned. I'd love to hear from you if there are, you've had this really incredible path. What are some of the key lessons that you've taken out of that path? And if you're willing to share some of the mistakes that you might have made along the way, I think there's a lot of lessons in those too. Those are sometimes more delicate to talk about, but can be really valuable as well.
Absolutely. You're very right. And in the context of African continent, a paradigm shift or change of mindsets from the leaders that have been there for a long time and have believed in one way of doing things. You see, the problem is when you're now you're not challenging their way of leading, but you're challenging what they're used to. For example, in Botswana, if you're challenging coal and it has been one source that they've depended on for so long, regardless of the fact of a power cut because of over-reliance on another country, it because it's unknown when you say renewable energy, it takes a lot to really convince a leader of first of all, the technology and that there's going to be sustainability. So I'll share a little bit about Botswana, where as much as we have a lot of coal, we highly depend on South Africa for electricity. And we've depended on it for a long time. So that means we had a small plant and a lot of up to 70 to 80% until 2013, we were highly reliant on South Africa. And then we built what is called Moola, which is our second power station, coal power station. And because of construction issues, it doesn't operate at 100%, which means we still continue to purchase power from the neighbors. And for me, that is an angle which I took advantage of. It was very clear that as much as we depend on coal, it was evident that it was failing not only when we have our own plant, but also failing when we're getting it from outside the country. So why are we resistant then to change, to change, which is good, which, is a solution towards climate change. So I decided to strike at a time where I could question the leadership based on all these facts, because they were down on paper. We were having 8 to 10 hours of power cuts. Others were having 3 to 4 days of power cuts. And when South Africa would have to meet their own internal demands and were having deficit, it was very clear that we would go days and weeks without power. It's a shame that it has to come to that. And that's the issue with Africa, or most African countries. It's that change of mind from what is known to what is new. And it's taken a lot. When I started saying to potential sponsors, sponsor a child, a solar lamp that costs $20. The first thing was, what is solar? What is renewable energy? So a lot of explanation had to be done. It can be demoralizing when you're hopping from company to company, and you can clearly see that as much as they like what you're bringing, it is unknown, and they have to convince another person on top who only knows that they just have to flick a light and electricity is there. And a lot of these companies have backup generators. So what is this? What is the $20 solar lamp to them, right? Additionally, if I'm not a big corporation and I'm one girl who's coming in saying, I've got this new technology which can help us fight climate change, they are not willing to do enough digging to find out how it's working in other countries. So luckily, I had been to the US through the Mandela Washington Fellowship, and I had reference points. I was able to say, go to this website, go, get into California, and you'll find that they're doing this, and that really worked. So when you get into climate change space and you're in the NGO and civil society space, you really have to be ready to demonstrate where else it has worked and what it is that you envision long term. It's a shame that we then have to really show the problems. At the same time, because civil society is thought to be, it's not taken very serious in a lot of African countries, unfortunately, because you're not making money out of it. So it tends to be where donors throw money to look good and then forget about it. So what we brought in, I asked a lot of these sponsors, what is it that is going wrong with your current sponsors? Where you're putting money in, how do you then know that there has been an impact? Then I demonstrated to them that I could show them a calculable impact. And I said to them, I have done a study where I've taken 7 solar lamps and I've given them to 7 scholars. And then I've observed over time 7 scholars using candles, 7 scholars using paraffin, 7 using electricity. And I've taken their school grades and they were all not doing well. They were failing, even those with electricity. And after 2 school terms, I was able to demonstrate that the ones who got a solar light were actually doing better, because now you have introduced what this technology is. You have told the child the potential it has in fighting a lot of ills in our world, right? You've also given them something which they didn't have before. To them, it's a cute toy, such as on and off. But what I did not foresee was that when I would return after 2 school terms and I would visit these households where I'd given them the solar lamp, a lot of these young children that I'd given the light to had actually gained weight. And deeper conversations and visits into their households, I found that the parents, and mostly women, were now cutting out the cost of candle, cutting out the cost of paraffin, and that money was going towards nutrition. So, if you can identify a link which to the leader is not only you saying climate change, but if you can identify something that politically guarantees them a vote by demonstrating other effects and other impacts that are positive, then you really get a buy-in. Because I now was able to say, not only have we changed the school grade of the scholar from fail to a pass, but we are empowering a woman in her household and her money goes towards nutrition. So it's not only the light, but there's an effort, there's a change towards the nutrition of a child, which means they can concentrate better in class. And my strategy was bring the leader in and say to them, you allowed me into your village and this is the result. And I would bring the sponsor in and say, you gave me this funding and this is the impact. It's a calculable impact versus you sponsoring something where the reporting is not thorough. Give me an extra $20,000 and I will guarantee you that I'll bring you results, which you can take back to your team to say, this is how we spent money. And to the leader, I would say, go back to the people and show them what this small light has done for each household. It wins you a vote. So is this not a win-win for everyone? So I've had to really play, not to weaknesses. I've had to play to what the political leader needs and play to what the sponsor needs. And that's how I think in civil society we need to do it, because a lot of the times we are known as very bad reporters. And for me, I was lucky enough, in my line of work, I'm required to write reports and report and demonstrate what an impact has been. So this is where I believe it's a strategy to getting the youth in at the table, not because we want to then say we have a youth at the table, but this is a way to demonstrate what the youth brings if we give them that 5 minutes to teach us something new.
Incredible, Sarah. I think there's a lot of lessons in there. And I would, you talked about sort of playing to the interests of the politicians and the sponsors, but that's also the community, right? And acting as that bridge between these different layers of needs and interests and decisions, and being able to tell a story in a compelling way, in an accurate way that sort of drives good decision making across all of those entities. And it sounds like, in the context of Botswana and the interest in coal, just the ability to show the viability of renewable energy, and how it does function at the community level. There might be opportunities, sort of planting those seeds, right, for future investments. Do you think much about how to scale up the project?
I do. As much as you can go back and demonstrate how perfectly how perfect a product is. And I think the problem is not enough people really understand climate change and the impacts. And when you're looking for continuation or to upscale as NGOs, it's very hard. Remember that a lot of times in civil society, we apply for funding and the terms of the funder are the ones that we have to bend to. And unfortunately, they may just be funding you for a year or for two. And additionally, they may have rules or their conditions are that you cannot sell the product you make. So over time, I've really had to, it takes time. Basically, in civil society, it takes too much time to upscale because we could not get a sponsor who could have continuity of the project when we built the solar lamps past 1 year, and they could not allow us to sell the lights. It means there wasn't now a profit made to buy new raw material and to continue to pay the women. But you take those funding rules and regulations because it pushes you towards the goal. Eventually, we will get to a sponsor. This is a unique product, and we want you to be able to continue to employ those 20 women and youth, and we want them to be able to sell those lights, right? And that's where the continuity would come in. And as much as those rules and regulations exist, you find that the team within those companies get to really appreciate the fact that you also don't know everything. So I don't know marketing and advertising, but they said to me, start with us, although we have these rules, because we're a very big organization that's worldwide. We cannot ban some of the rules. But if you can demonstrate how these women and youth, how this employment has changed their lives, if it's not us, somebody else is going to realize that you want to empower this community for them to own the slum, for them to have a business, and we can then come in, or whoever can come in can teach them how to knock door to door, how to market this lamp to a shop that will take it across Botswana or even just the Southern African region. So upscaling in civil society, very difficult, very difficult. The vision remains, and you keep pushing for more recognition. And it's platforms such as these. And I must say, for me, it's been a great support from the US government. The embassy here really stands up for us. When we, as alumni, when we come in and we say, we're stuck a little bit, they get us the right people who can advise you on, well, maybe package your proposal this way, or go for it as restrictive as it is, because it might open other doors. So that's our wish. Eventually, we want to go back to those women and youth and say, the project is not for a year. The project is for you to have for as long as you want. And you can continue building these lights, and now you can sell them, and you can have money rolling in to buy your raw material and sell this as far as possible. But we're not there yet, unfortunately.
Okay, now that's, I think that all makes a lot of sense, and that sounds like you might get there essentially. And I'm sorry, your video turned off. I think it's just a bandwidth issue, but we're able to hear you clearly. There have been a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. So I think I have a few of my own, but I'm going to go to the audience questions first if I can get this to work. Here we go. So with regards to Botswana, do you believe that the government would in the near future start to believe enough in the reaching benefits of utilizing the wealth of renewable energy available to them as other countries have started doing? Or are they too stuck in their ways? I guess, the question is, how optimistic are you that the Botswana government will start thinking about renewable energy as a viable option?
I remain positive. So we're lucky in that we don't have presidents that refuse to leave the seat at the end of that term. And I've seen a slow progress, but it's getting there. So what we're seeing now is the energy policy draft was a draft stage for the last 8 to 10 years. All of a sudden, it's final. And that means now independent power producers can come in. And it's really grown an interest in international companies wanting to partner with institutions, universities, to do 1 to 4 to 10 megawatts. And they may seem like small efforts, but I think it's the right direction to get the political parties in and convinced, because you're harnessing free sun. And I think the current president realizes and appreciates the different international efforts. We've had JICA, we've had the US really support renewable energy, and others such as World Bank and so forth. But what lagged behind was upscaling, large scale, your 50 megawatts and so forth. And we're starting to have that conversation, but not only have the conversation, but we're starting to put expression of interest out and tenders. So I believe that it's on the right track. There's a goal 2025 to get renewable energy a mix up to 25%. Will we get there? I don't know, but I believe with the current leadership, we might just.
Great news. You sort of you've spoken a little bit to some of the role of international actors in this and the private sector. So I wonder if you could take a minute to talk a little bit more, maybe in detail, about how you see the private sector engaging in this space. If there's sort of a pathway for scaled up engagement with the private sector. And I'm curious about your supporters. Are they domestic? Are they from Botswana? Do you have a mix of sort of international and domestic? And how can we sort of I think there's a lot of interest in the international community to be supporting the work of people like you, right? And it's finding ways to make those connections and help. And obviously you've been very successful at that. And so maybe sharing some of the lessons that you've learned in this work in how to engage with international actors and what more needs to be done.
To be quite honest, I find it's half and half. We have a lot of local corporate companies supporting us, and we have a few individuals. But the support from international individuals has been amazing. We had our ambassador Newman when he was in the US. He fundraised. He opened a GoFund page for us, and James Gardner, who was the economics officer at the US Embassy. I would say, I think the lucky part with us has been that I put myself at such an extreme to get people to recognize what we're doing. So if you say to somebody you're going to walk 100 kilometers in 2 days, they cannot even start to imagine what kind of punishment that is on your body. But at the same time, there's a bit of they're intrigued as, will she do it? And if she does it, I will pledge towards that kilometer that she's saying she will walk for that $20 and see if she does it. What they don't realize, it motivates me to not give up, right? So that extreme part of it has really gotten us support especially from the US. We've had Europe as well, people reaching us through the GoFundMe page. But at a higher scale, your big power plant, solar, government is really, I think in the last year to two, they've really opened up for potential investors to come in, and the technology, anybody with the technology to come in, and for them to have a private partnership and find a way to grow renewable energy because of the big failure with our second power plant. So it's now not a matter of let's think about it, but it's necessary that we move towards renewable energy. And we're starting to have more land degradation, topsoil, soil erosion. We're starting to have more wildfires. And if you know, Lauren, we're a country that prides itself in our wildlife. A lot of people come to Botswana because of the big five. And because of the big efforts towards protecting our wildlife, the animals actually leave other countries and come into our country. So it's very important that we protect our environment. And the power plant we have, the coal one, is very close to where we need to protect that resource in the north. So I think government recognizes that. And there's a lot of companies that now are willing to come in and support implementation at large scale. At small scale with us, we really do welcome international partners because they always bring also new knowledge. But recognition is still very hard because I'm technical and I really don't know how to do the advertising, the selling side of it. But I can tell you now, we've had more American support backing us up on teaching me how to do videos, document, because I would not document while I'm walking the 100 kilometers. Somebody came from the US and said, David Howard, he said, show us what you're doing. Take a video and tell us how it is, because we're curious to really understand what kind of environment you're in. And once I did that, people wrote and said, what? You're walking in the middle of nowhere. You're in a pan surrounded by salt, no tree, and you're walking for 12 hours per session? How much do you need to get these lamps out? What do you need? So I'm fortunate enough to have the power of social media. You're able to get people coming in and saying, we understand you're technical, you don't know how to market yourself, we will get you out there. So that's really helpful.
Well, and I mean, I think it speaks to the, that it's not enough to have a good idea, right? It's like, that's great. That's the first step. But then figuring out the ways to share that idea. So how do you create that compelling story and to show the impact or the potential impact of that idea? And it sounds like you've worked hard to create those connections with people who are interested and engaged and want to help support your work. The other thing you mentioned was, I think this recognition that the government needs to play a role in terms of creating an enabling environment for international actors to come in, right? And so I think it's interesting to see. I think your work at the local level showing the impact that these solar powered lights can have is helping sort of on. I guess, in a sort of grassroots way, right, of showing the viability. But then you also have these larger sort of geopolitical issues with climate change and a push for renewable energy and economic growth that's not dependent on coal and the power plant situation, right? So finding ways to connect those stories to help drive government interest and investment in the sector is really important. Okay, another question has come in. What recommendations do you have for tackling the root causes of environmental problems and building African capacities for tackling the effects of climate change? You in your last response, you got at the importance of the environment in Botswana and the role of wildlife and so. Can you speak to where you see creative ways for addressing the root causes of environmental problems and building that domestic capacity for tackling the effects of climate change?
For me, I've seen it as okay. So I think my generation and generations to come, that's where we need to be hitting hard. If there's a time to really demonstrate, we need to engrave it in the younger kids. that a desert such as Botswana, where we don't have enough water, where we don't have enough jobs, what is it that, and we have depleting diamonds. The more we dig the ground for diamonds, the more degradation, the more we're pulling out the earth and so forth. We need to then be really instilling innovation in younger generations, because when the diamonds run out, when the coal is run out, if we keep degrading, the wildlife is going to move away or even die, right? If we keep polluting the largest online delta, which we own here, the Okavango Delta, then what are we really going to be left with as Botswana? That is the one thing that stays in my head. And then I wonder, will there be employment for my kids? Not even employment. Like, what is it that's going to happen to them and their kids if we don't start safeguarding the environment now? And it's efforts that really challenge the leaders in what they're currently doing. So it's up to me to challenge them and to demonstrate the impact of coal on our very small environment. It's up to me to challenge when they go and, pull out gas from the ground, and to challenge them, why are we not re-injecting rainwater into aquifers when we know that we battle with El Nino? Challenge them to say, why are we not using indigenous knowledge to grow sectors in herbalism and harvest what forage and encourage, we have so much medicine that we could show to the world, share with the world, find a way to harvest it, but also keep the environment safe. So it's what you were saying earlier. It's not enough to have a good idea, but when you're executing it, what is it that you're doing that guarantees that that resource is still available for future generations? And I think that's what lacks in demonstrating to our leaders the importance of environmental safeguarding. And because they've been coming from sectors, environmental safeguarding has been, I think, something like it's thrown at the back as a backbench. In the back is, oh, you environmentalists, you're always bothering us about hugging trees. And it's when you demonstrate the importance of that tree, what it does in terms of air and cleansing and so forth, and feeding the environment. And we're not doing enough of that as Africa. We have the knowledge. Our grandparents have been doing it. The way they were plowing, the way they were hunting was in a way in which it did not deplete the resource. But we've just gotten so greedy. And the time is now to show our kids, teach them those ways which, our grandparents, how they practice. It's time to go back to the basics, basically. I don't know if that answers it.
No, I think that you made like a lot of really good points. A lot of our work in the program that I direct at the Wilson Center is focused on helping decision makers recognize that if you're not considering the environment in policies, in responses to development needs or conflict, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. Because the environment, environmental degradation can contribute to these issues, but it also can play a really important role in the response. And so I think your point about the tree huggers is exactly right. That's what we're trying to move away from, is that the environment is an add-on, or like if everything else is going well, then we can pay attention to how safe or protected our environment is. But no, it's really a key component of human health, of economic growth, of how we live in our communities. So I fully support that. And I think that climate change has helped maybe with some of that narrative, right? And President Biden has been very clear that the climate change crisis is connected to the other crises he sees in his administration, with the economic crisis, with the pandemic, and with the social and racial injustices that we see in the US and elsewhere, right? And that none of these things are operating on their own, and that there are a lot of connections, and that by recognizing that, you can find really important and strong entry points for responding. And ideally, you know, when you respond to when you're responding to climate change, you're also addressing these other issues. And I think, you know, Sarah, your point about the fact that the children gained weight and that there was a nutritional impact by virtue of having these solar powered lights, I mean, that's incredible. And that's exactly the kind of thinking and innovation that we need to be applying. Okay, so there are other questions that have come in, so I'll stop. How can U.S. organizations and YALI better support partnerships with African climate activist organizations? So very specific. Good question.
I think we need more Lauren, more Lauren to you know, people like Lauren to provide guidance. Remember, you know, the U.S. has really already made the mistakes. So it, as the African continent, we get to appreciate the diplomatic efforts to combat, to keep us from making the same mistakes. Because when we make them, it's a costly exercise. Even for the US, it was a costly exercise. So I would just say the support that we continue to have, you know, I think the US has always had in my experience, has always had an open door policy where if I've never had a problem with needing to see or get a recommendation of somebody from the US, even if it's an office here, the embassy, and they don't have the know-how, they've always referred me to somebody in the US who can guide. Platforms such as these ones really expose us as young African leaders to not only networking sessions but collaborations. But you always learn something you didn't know. You always, this is my experience. The Mandela Washington Fellowship, what it did for me, what the US government did for me, was it took me from self-doubting myself, and it put me in a classroom with like-minded people, like-minded Africans who doubted the ideas we had, because renewable energy is such a new thing, or environmental safeguarding has been there, but in Africa was not as, you know, we always took the back bench, because if you spoke up, it was always, you criticized for it. And it gave us the guts to go out for it. You had to put a work plan together. You had to present it. You had to back up why your idea deserved funding. And then additionally, once you left, there was encouragement from the government, the US government, to say, there's this much funding, we're giving you the scale. Now there's this much funding. Put the idea together. Let's see if really you applied yourself. And you know, for me, it is the foundation I needed to trust in myself again. That fellowship, that 6 weeks, it really put me forward. I'd always had the ideas. I just was not confident enough. I did not believe in myself enough. And it made me braver to take risks. So when I started with the 100 kilometers, I thought, what am I doing? You know, what? I'm not going to make it. And I will have taken people's money and bought these lights, and they're going to say, you didn't complete the 100 kilometers. But it was the fact that I wrote it down. So the US should continue to, the support that we're getting now, it should continue, because Lauren, I can tell you one thing that I'm learning is that a lot of civil society, we depend so much on handouts and donors and so forth. When that funding runs out, everything stops. We somehow, if we continue with such relationships, such as the one as we have with the US, we're going to learn, well, in my experience, I'm learning how to break away from that, how to sustain programs past donors' funding. And I've learned that you can't do it alone. So every project I've gotten funding from the US has always been, how are you going to empower the community? How are you going to involve others? And in turn, that has taught me I cannot do this alone. I need the community and I need to involve them as partners. And that is the only way I can sustainably carry this forward. For example, I could have said, I'll sit here and build, because our lights, it was 4,250 lights. I could have sat here and said, I'm going to take all the money and build the lights, right? But you know, the projects that I had before that was that were US funded, prepared me for the next funder, for me to demonstrate that inclusion, you know, and say I can't do it alone. I need to do it with a community, and that's what we need to build with young leaders. Is that we need to form more consortiums, come together and do these. Because you don't know everything, you know. So if you bring like-minded people, then they teach you a new skill. And if you don't learn something new every day, then somebody has said you're not alive if you don't learn something new every day.
Down your insights. I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think that it's also just that feeling of you're not alone. There's a lot of people trying to do a lot of really good things, and there's ways to leverage that interest and engagement and knowledge, right? And most people want to help and they want to support your efforts. So reaching out is a critical part of that. We have a few minutes left. There's a couple questions that came in that are somewhat similar, so I'm going to combine them. It's really about how civil society can hold state level governments accountable in their efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change on the continent. So and how do we get through to leaders on climate change action? So I would say, you know, if you could share a little bit about your experience working with the Botswana government and what lessons you've drawn from that in terms of how you can really help push the needle forward.
Say start small. I think one of the biggest issues is that we overthink taking that step to demonstrate to the government that the role of civil society in combating climate change. And we overthink it because you think you have to put such a big proposal together to demonstrate to government. To be honest, government appreciates even just the smallest efforts. I was telling you earlier that I started with just 7 solar lights. So I took money out of my pocket to demonstrate the impact of the solar light, just so that I can have government support. And to do nothing else, but just to facilitate entry and for me to get recognition. So I would say to a lot of African leaders, don't overthink the idea and don't start too big. I started with 7 solar lights. I can tell you, the first lights I started with was so bad. They were $4 each, and they worked only for 1 year. But it was enough to demonstrate the impact of renewable energy on climate change. Because, you know, in addition to the nutrition benefit, Lauren, the women that the mothers of those 7 scholars said, you know, as a single parent, we keep our lights burning, as in a fire, burning the whole night. So this is wood fire, as a demonstration that somebody's home, as a way of saying somebody's home. So it's a security measure. And they were saying, now I don't have to collect as much firewood. Imagine burning firewood from 8 when it gets dark, 7 until 5, 6 in the morning. It's a lot of firewood, just as a security measure for a woman, you know, just so that she can have light to say somebody's home and I am home. And if you come into my home, I will be able to identify you. And now we're giving them a light, which they can just press a button and the thief or whoever was trying to get in would move away. And these women said just that those 7 lights meant less firewood collected, less firewood burned. Additionally, for security, it meant they spent less time out in the bush where they were getting attacked, right? So don't overthink the process. Don't overthink the funding. Don't overthink what you need. And don't be shy or don't be intimidated to demonstrate your knowledge of climate change, because then you're showing them the real impact, and that's how they then get to back you up.
I mean, I think that's incredible. And I think it shows, you know, in my opening, I talked about how climate change is the context in which we're living and all of these things are happening, right? So any action taken to mitigate or adapt to climate change is, if it's well thought through, it can be sort of having all these impacts across sectors, right? It can be having an impact in the health sector and the security sector and in women's empowerment. And I think that the more we can all be thinking about those opportunities across sectors, the bigger the impact will be. And it's, I think your point about not feeling like you need to do it all at once, but just showing in a small scale how these things work is really important. Let's see, maybe this is a final question, is how do we create awareness if leaders are not coming on board in a Botswanan context? I think you could take that broader though. I mean, we've dealt with that here in the US too, right? So how do we continue growing awareness of these issues outside of national government's leadership on this issue?
It's a tough one to answer, but I say the power of social media. I am very happy for the power of social media. I'm still very social media challenged, but I find that I can use it to really demonstrate the impact that we're having and challenge government to support us, to say we're on the ground, we're doing it. You know, with creating awareness, I've always found the strategy is to demonstrating a win-win for everyone. So if you're able to demonstrate to the leadership or to the politician what they're gaining, because they just want to vote, then it helps you to get the result which you're looking for. At the same time, if you're able to make them look good they love that. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but they love looking good in the community. So I've always found a bottom-up approach works for me. When I start with a stakeholder consultation at the village level, and I meet with the chief, and I meet with the social worker, and then I try to understand what the need is in that area. Then I go to the area councillor, because he's the one looking for the vote. But I've understood what the people need first before I go to him. So when I approach him and I say, I can get your village money, not even money, I can get your village resources based on a need I have identified, and you need to facilitate it for me and ensure that you show leadership and facilitation for us to win this funding, for me to bring the resources to your people. They get to appreciate that, because, and I'm very frank and very straightforward. And I say to them, you're up for elections in a year to two. You need to convince more people. And what I do is I find out what they promised to the people and what they didn't do. So now I can say to you, you promised this and that, and you failed to do it. This is your opportunity to actually do something. So there's a village not very far from where I live, and Philips and Signify. So Philips has an NGO called, a foundation called Signify. They're installing for some of the best solar street lights that I've ever seen. And they're doing a whole 2 kilometers of them. They're installing more in the community hall, in the village ward, and in a football field. And the way I got them to come to us, because I found out about the YALI fund. I went to the leadership first and I said, it's very dark in your village and you're up for elections soon. and you haven't done anything. There's no electricity. There's, high rate of crime, and you don't have street lights, and everything you said you're going to do, you're behind. So in you bringing awareness, make sure that there's a way where you can create a win-win for everyone, for the community, for the politician, for the leadership, for yourselves, for the funder as well. Because when you have packaged your proposal or your awareness sessions like that, then everybody wins.
Very politically savvy, Sarah. And actually, that was a really helpful way to sort of walk through your process and how it's been so effective. So thank you for taking the time to do that. I'm afraid that we're at the end of our time. I want to share a few things that I'm taking away from the conversation. One is be bold. I think, we don't all have to walk 100 kilometers in 2 days, but think about what the equivalent of that is. Be able to show impact, especially on the things that matter to the stakeholders that you're trying to bring on board. And that 3, you can't do it alone. And so leveraging all of these YALI tools and other, and not being afraid to reach out to people and ask for help and get guidance. Sarah, thank you so much for your inspiring words today and for sharing your story. It's a really incredible work that you've been doing, and a lot of lessons that can be taken up by others, hoping to have a similar impact. I'd like to thank the Wilson Center's Africa program and the partners at the State Department and USAID for the invitation to join this important summit and for all the hard work that goes into pulling together these critical activities. And thank you to our participants for your excellent questions and engagement. This is just day 1 of a full week of really incredible sessions and networking opportunities. So I encourage you all to follow the agenda closely. My colleague will be sharing information on this screen shortly about tomorrow's session. So you can stay tuned for the next minute or so, and she'll be sharing the screen. Thank you so much. And Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful questions and challenging me. And thank you very much, Lauren. I have had a lovely discussion with you.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye.